Hello, my name is Daniel. Thank you for being here with me today. If you enjoy real, heartbreaking, cheating stories from Reddit, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and leave a comment to share your thoughts. It really means a lot to me. This is a story that has stayed with me ever since I first read it. It's not about betrayal between lovers in the usual sense, but about the delicate wounds left behind after loss, and the complicated ways grief can bind or break families. The story comes from a man named Ethan Rivera, who is now 34 years old and living in a quiet town outside Burlington, Vermont. When Ethan was only 25, his world changed forever. His then-girlfriend, later wife, Maya, became pregnant. They married soon after, filled with hope, and were blessed with a little girl. For a while, life was tender and bright, but tragedy struck just 2 years later. Maya fell gravely ill, and despite every desperate attempt to save her, she passed away, leaving Ethan alone with their daughter. Devastated, Ethan decided to move back to Vermont, where his parents still lived. His demanding job often kept him away, and his parents, seeing his exhaustion and heartbreak, offered to help raise their granddaughter. They never once made him feel guilty for leaning on them, reminding him again and again that love for their granddaughter was not a burden, but a gift. For years, this arrangement worked. Ethan poured himself into his career, gradually finding stability. Eventually, at 30, he was able to buy a small house just half an hour from his parents. His daughter, now 8 years old, split her time between a kind nanny and her grandparents while Ethan worked long hours from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening. At first, everything seemed steady, but Ethan's grief was not his alone. His late wife's mother, Linda, who was 52, also carried an unbearable sorrow. Maya had been her only child, and Ethan's daughter her only grandchild. When Linda decided to move to Ethan's town, he welcomed the idea at first. He understood her desire to stay close, to hold on to the one piece of Maya she still had. But Linda's presence quickly became overwhelming. She began showing up at Ethan's house nearly every day, sometimes even when no one was home, letting herself in with a spare key she had somehow obtained. She stayed until late in the evenings, even on weekends, and often cleaned or reorganized without asking. Ethan, drained from work and yearning for some sense of privacy, spoke to her several times. The conversations always ended in tears or arguments, with Ethan gently but firmly asking her to respect boundaries. She would agree, but soon the cycle would begin again. For a while things calmed down, but small intrusions kept resurfacing. Then, last week, the fragile balance finally broke. After 7 years of living as a widower, Ethan had started dating again. The pandemic had slowed things down, but with the world slowly reopening, he invited his new partner, Rachel, over one evening. Wanting a quiet night together, Ethan asked his parents to watch his daughter. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to feel the stirrings of happiness again. But that fragile peace shattered when Linda suddenly let herself in without knocking, calling, or asking. She found them together on the couch and erupted in fury. Her grief twisted into anger as she accused Ethan of betraying Maya's memory, of being unfaithful to a woman who had been gone for 7 years. The words cut deep, reopening old wounds that had never fully healed. Ethan, trembling with a mix of sorrow and frustration, finally snapped. He snatched the key from Linda's hand, forced her out of his home, and told her she was no longer welcome there. Now Ethan sits in silence, torn apart by guilt and doubt. His parents, though supportive of him, also feel sympathy for Linda and have quietly urged him to reconsider. After all, she is a lonely mother who lost everything. But Ethan cannot shake the feeling that his daughter's home, his own sanctuary, is being invaded. his right to move forward in life being strangled by someone else's grief. This is where his question lies. Is he wrong for banning his former mother-in-law from his house? Or is he simply protecting his peace, his daughter's stability, and his chance at healing? The comments from others weigh heavily on both sides. Some say Ethan is not at fault at all. This is his house, his child, his life. They remind him that he lost his wife too, that he is mourned and grieved, and that choosing to open his heart again is not cheating. "You've carried your pain with dignity," the comment read, "but it's time to protect your peace. If Linda continues this way, she might even convince your daughter that you're betraying her mother's memory. Don't let anyone plant that seed in her heart." Another comment came from Lord Yeastring, who was equally firm. He said Ethan had already warned Linda multiple times, and enough was enough. If she truly wanted to see her granddaughter, she should respect his rules, calling first, asking permission, and showing gratitude rather than entitlement. "Good locks make good neighbors," Lord Yeastring wrote. "If someone abuses a key to your home, you take it back. You were right to do so." Still, not every response was so simple. A commenter named Hazy Bop acknowledged Ethan's pain, but asked him not to forget Linda's perspective. "Her only child is gone. Her only grandchild is tied to you. She is drowning in loneliness, and her grief is driving her to cling in ways that are unhealthy. I agree you need to set boundaries, but remember, this isn't just an overbearing mother-in-law. This is a grieving, broken mother. If you can, try to find a compromise in honor of Maya. She deserves at least that much." It was clear that people were divided, and perhaps that reflected the messy, heartbreaking reality of grief itself. There was no single right answer, only pain, and the fragile hope that time might soften it. From here, another story emerged, and though different, it carried the same undercurrent of exhaustion, grief, and the question of how much one person can give. This one came from a man named Caleb Thompson, a 31-year-old living in a small apartment in Burlington with his girlfriend Sophie and their 4.5-month-old daughter.
Sophie had always been deeply committed to breastfeeding. She believed in the health benefits, the antibodies, and the bond it created. When she was on maternity leave, it worked well. But once she returned to her job in healthcare, things became more complicated. To keep their daughter on natural milk, Sophie began pumping with a lightweight pump they had invested in. She stuck to a rigid schedule, 6 a.m. in the morning, multiple sessions through the day, and a final one at 10:30 p.m. She was exhausted, bone-deep tired, and constantly worried about whether she was producing enough. Caleb, watching her stumble through sleepless nights and heavy days, tried to help where he could. He often took over the last feeding at night, washing bottles, cleaning pump parts, and rocking their daughter so Sophie could rest. But still, her schedule ruled their lives. One night, around 9 p.m., Caleb suggested gently that she skip the final pump and go to bed early. He would handle everything, and she could catch up on the sleep she so desperately needed. Instead of relief, his words brought an explosion. Sophie snapped, accusing him of not caring about the baby, of dismissing the importance of antibodies, especially since she would soon receive a vaccine that could pass those antibodies to their daughter. Her voice cracked as she told him he didn't understand. Since then, she had grown cold and distant, leaving Caleb to wonder if he had spoken out of ignorance, if he had somehow made her feel unsupported when all he wanted was to help. The responses online were swift. Queen Oreo wrote, "You're wrong. You can't just skip a pumping session. The milk doesn't disappear. If she skips, it builds up, causing pain, possible engorgement, even mastitis. Suggesting she skip wasn't a solution. It could make things worse." Another commenter, Ben DeCina, quoted Caleb's earlier words, "She's just not fun to be around," and called him out. That alone makes you the one at fault. She's tired, she's drained, and she's still fighting for your baby's health. Instead of criticizing her attitude, step up more. Pinky echoed the same warning, saying skipping would only lead to pain and mess. Then added, "If you don't like how tired she is, then help her. Wash the pump, hold the baby so she can nap. Boyfriend duties can ease her load, not add to it." Finally, Jade Pumpkin, a mother herself, offered a softer perspective. "She's exhausted. Encourage her, support her. And if she decides tomorrow to stop, then stand beside her. Neither of you are villains. You are just tired parents doing your best." Caleb read these words with a heavy heart. He didn't want to fail Sophie. He didn't want her to feel alone in her struggle. But sometimes love meant listening, even when the exhaustion blurred patience into conflict. The story ended with the same haunting question that lingered in Ethan's. When love is strained by grief, exhaustion, and survival, how do you know where to draw the line between setting boundaries and giving everything you have left? Kelly's words still echoed in my head, not because they were cruel, but because they were so painfully honest. She said she understood where I was coming from, yet she still leaned toward calling me wrong, not in a harsh way, but in that soft, deliberate tone that cuts deeper than anger ever could. She told me I needed to stand by the man I claimed to love, not throw him to the wolves just to protect my own fragile sense of safety around my parents. And she was right, even though it stung to admit it. Another voice chimed in, someone who went by Dangerous Plate, and their words landed like stones in my stomach. They said I must have hurt him deeply, that an apology wasn't optional, it was necessary. I could almost feel the weight of those sentences pressing down on me. They reminded me that it wasn't him who had to change, or adapt, or soften who he was. It was my parents who needed to learn how to treat him with dignity. A few short FaceTime calls, they suggested, might help ease the gap before meeting in person. Their advice was practical, but the shame behind it lingered. Others joined in too, like an endless chorus pointing out my blind spots. One even shared their own story about having difficult conversations with a partner before introducing them to family, making me realize my mistake wasn't the conversation itself, it was the way I delivered it. Asking him not to act too gay, even if I didn't mean it the way it sounded, was cruel. It stripped away part of who he was, part of the very reason I loved him. And for that, they said, I needed to apologize. No excuses, no justifications. Just own it. I sat there rereading every line, feeling the heaviness in my chest grow thicker. Each comment was a mirror, showing me versions of myself I didn't want to see. Internalized fear, cowardice, and an unwillingness to truly protect the one I loved. It was hard to take in, harder still to admit, but deep down, I knew they were right. But before I could dwell too long in my shame, another story broke into focus, one that felt eerily close to mine, yet painfully different. It came from a man named Aaron, 24 years old, living in a small apartment outside Portland with his girlfriend, Jess, who was 23. They had been together for 2 years, and she had recently moved in when her job shifted online. By all accounts, they should have been happy, building something together, building a life that felt steady. But lurking underneath their relationship was a shadow named John. John was one of Jess's closest friends from her college days. He was loud, flamboyant, and unfiltered in a way that might have seemed harmless at first. But to Aaron, it was anything but. John made constant jokes about him,
about his body, his masculinity, even his sexuality. He would say things like, "Careful, Jess, or I'll steal your boyfriend," and everyone would laugh except Aaron. For him, it wasn't funny. It was degrading, and each time it chipped away at his sense of safety in his own home. The worst part wasn't even John's words, although they were sharp enough. The worst part was Jess's laughter. She didn't just ignore it, she encouraged it. She told Aaron to lighten up, to stop being so sensitive, as if the shame wasn't real, as if his discomfort wasn't valid. One night, it all came crashing down. They had a few friends over, drinks were flowing, and John was at his loudest. Aaron pulled Jess aside, hoping she would finally see how much it hurt him. She promised she'd say something, but even then, she turned it into a joke. She told John to ease up because Aaron was uncomfortable, and that became the punchline of the night. The laughter roared, and then John pushed further, saying maybe Aaron was so defensive because deep down he might be a little gay. That was the line. That was where it stopped being teasing and became cruel. Aaron's anger boiled over, and for once he found his voice. He told John to leave, told him he wouldn't tolerate it anymore. The room fell silent, the fun screeched to a halt, and suddenly Aaron was the villain. Jess's friends turned on him, pleading with him to calm down, insisting it was all harmless fun. But Aaron couldn't, not anymore. It was his home, his dignity, his very identity on the line, and he couldn't keep swallowing it just to keep the peace. Eventually, John left, dragging the laughter out the door with him. Jess followed soon after, not to comfort Aaron, but to scold him. She said he had overreacted, embarrassed her, ruined the night. She told her all her friends were angry, and she didn't hide the disappointment in her voice. And Aaron was left alone in the silence of the apartment, surrounded by walls that suddenly didn't feel like his anymore. I kept hearing my own voice tremble as I replayed the night in my head. I hadn't wanted to ruin the evening, but the moment I spoke up, everything collapsed around me. Jacob accused me of being narrow-minded, tossing the word homophobic at me like a weapon. What cut even deeper was that Emily, the woman I thought would stand beside me, said my reaction had come across the same way. Instead of protecting me, she stood in the same corner as him, laughing it off, as if my boundaries were nothing more than an overreaction. I felt smaller in that room than I ever had before. The truth was simple. Jacob had crossed the line again and again. It wasn't just one offhand joke or one careless comment. It was a pattern of disrespect, one that Emily had allowed to grow. I told her how I felt, but instead of listening, she laughed along with him, enabling the very behavior that made me uncomfortable. That night, I realized it wasn't just Jacob who had betrayed me. Emily had too, by choosing his feelings over mine. I found myself reading through responses online, desperate for reassurance that I wasn't losing my mind. One comment struck me harder than the rest. It came from a man who said he was gay, and he admitted he was tired of people excusing behavior like Jacob's. Being part of a community, he wrote, doesn't give anyone the right to treat others with disrespect. He explained how he despised the assumption that every straight man must be secretly hiding something. His words gave me a strange kind of comfort. For the first time, I didn't feel completely alone. Someone out there understood. Another response compared the situation to Emily being the one targeted. What if it had been her, surrounded by my friends, all making crude remarks about her? Would she have laughed then? Or would she have felt the same sinking shame I carried that night? That thought stayed with me. It was the bitter reminder that she hadn't even tried to imagine how it felt to be in my place. Instead, she joined in on the laughter and left me standing there, humiliated. The word people kept using was harsh but true. Harassment. That's what it was. Not teasing, not casual joking. Harassment. And Emily had failed me completely by brushing it aside. Reading those words, my chest ached. I wasn't angry as much as I was heartbroken. The woman I loved had chosen the easy road, the one where she didn't have to confront her friend, even if it meant abandoning me. That was the moment I realized I was carrying this weight on my own. I can't lie, part of me wanted to believe that maybe Emily just didn't know how to respond. Maybe she had felt trapped, caught between me and her friend. But when I looked at her laughter, her dismissive words, I knew it wasn't that. She hadn't tried to comfort me afterward. She hadn't even checked in with me later that night. No, she had made her choice, and it wasn't me. By the end of the evening, I felt invisible. I walked home beside her, but the silence between us said everything words couldn't. It was as though I was a stranger in my own relationship. That loneliness lingered even after the night was over, creeping into every quiet moment afterward. When I think back on it now, what devastates me most is not Jacob's cruelty, it's Emily's betrayal. I could have handled a friend being disrespectful, but my girlfriend, the woman who knew my fears, my struggles, and my heart, chose to stand on the wrong side. And that choice shattered something between us that I don't think will ever be whole again. Just when I thought the night had drained every bit of strength I had, a news story surfaced. I read it, hoping maybe it would pull me away from my own pain, but instead, it mirrored it in an unexpected way. A woman 35 wrote about her husband 47 and their 11-year-old daughter who had countless allergies. Shellfish, dairy, tomatoes, eggplants, the list went on. Despite knowing this, her husband refused to change the household habits. He still brought those very foods into their kitchen, still cooked with them, and still ignored the pleas of the woman who only wanted to keep their daughter safe. She described how he would make dishes with lobster, pretending it wasn't such a big deal, while she quietly panicked about cross-contamination. She admitted that on some nights she ordered takeout just to protect their child from his negligence. Her words carried exhaustion, but more than that, sorrow. She wasn't just frustrated, she was heartbroken. Watching the man she loved put their daughter at risk again and again, as if her safety wasn't worth the effort of change. As I read her story, I realized it was a reflection of my own. Different circumstances, yes, but the same hollow ache. To love someone who refuses to hear you, who dismisses your pain as if it were an inconvenience. That, I thought, is the kind of wound that lingers long after the argument ends. Elena had warned Daniel many times before, but this time it felt different. Their daughter, Sophie, only 9 years old, had a severe shellfish allergy, one that could turn fatal within minutes. Yet Daniel, at 41, had insisted on bringing home lobster for dinner, casually brushing it off as if Elena's fears were exaggerated. When he placed the dish on the table, Elena's heart sank. Sophie reached for her plate, and Elena snapped. Her voice cracked as she told Daniel that this wasn't just about preferences or control, it was about their daughter's life. Daniel rolled his eyes, muttering that Sophie could simply pick it out, as if fragments of contamination didn't matter. Elena felt her stomach twist. Unable to hold back her anger, she pushed the dish away, throwing out the ingredients Daniel loved, but Sophie could never touch. Daniel's face turned red with fury, accusing her of being controlling, of ruining his freedom. For a moment, Elena almost doubted herself. Maybe she was too strict, too protective. But then she looked at Sophie's small, frightened face, and she knew. She was not wrong. She was a mother fighting for her child's safety, while her husband chose selfish indulgence over caution. The argument spiraled, Daniel slamming his hand against the table like a frustrated child. His words were sharp, cutting into Elena's already fragile resolve. She stood there, silent tears falling, realizing that the man she had once trusted now seemed incapable of protecting her daughter from the simplest danger. What scared her most wasn't the lobster, it was Daniel's disregard. The thought that he might only learn when tragedy struck haunted her, leaving her with a heavy ache in her chest. She cleaned the table in silence that night, Sophie clinging to her side. Daniel stormed off, muttering curses under his breath. For Elena, the silence was louder than any shouting. It was the sound of a marriage cracking, of love eroded by recklessness, of a future that seemed uncertain. She didn't know if Daniel would ever change, but she knew one truth. She could not let his carelessness decide whether their daughter lived or died. This story, though painful, mirrors situations that many families face today. It isn't always about shellfish or allergies, but about partners who minimize risks, ignore boundaries, or dismiss genuine fears. When someone repeatedly disregards safety, whether it's physical, emotional, or mental, they place their loved ones in harm's way. That neglect can leave deep scars, not only on trust, but on the relationship itself. If you find yourself in a situation like Elena's, the first step is to recognize that protecting yourself or your child is not controlling, it is necessary. Love should never mean tolerating recklessness that endangers your well-being. Have calm but firm conversations about boundaries and make it clear that ignoring them is unacceptable. If the other person continues to dismiss your concerns, it may be time to involve outside support, whether that's family, friends, or even professional guidance. For those who carry the weight of emotional trauma from toxic dynamics, healing requires both time and intentional care. Journaling, therapy, or even small acts of reclaiming independence can help rebuild a sense of control. It's important to remind yourself that you are not too much for wanting safety, respect, and care. Above all, watch for the warning signs. Dismissing health risks, invalidating your feelings, or consistently prioritizing their wants over your needs are red flags that should never be ignored. You deserve a relationship where your safety and emotions matter. Choosing to stand firm, even if it means standing alone, is often the bravest and most loving thing you can do for yourself and those who depend on you.